Good afternoon, everyone. Geopolitics, LNG, and Natural Gas. Welcome and great new year. Robert Brooks, founder and chairman at RBAC. James Brooks, director of business development at RBAC. RBAC is the correct pronunciation. Please help me.
Hello.
Go ahead, Bob.
Hi, this is Dr. Robert Brooks, and I'm happy to be on your podcast, Armando, and happy to be with also with my son, James, who's been working with the company for many, many years and been doing a great job. So thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you, James. At the end, please reserve 5 minutes to talk about your company activities, and we can discuss a little bit about that. Well, let me start with Robert, please.
Okay.
With the largest reserves of conventional and unconventional natural gas in the world, who are the main reserves? Does everyone export via pipelines or LNG ships? What are the global LNG and NG outlook, Robert Brooks, please?
Okay, well, according to latest reports that are available on the proven reserves, the Middle East has the most, and then former Soviet Union, Russia mostly, second, Asia Pacific, and then North America. If you look at it in terms of countries, Russia first with about 20% of the total reserves. Believe it or not, Iran is actually second with about 17%. Qatar about 13%. Turkmenistan about 7%. US about 7%, and China about 4.5%. So it's really quite a range of countries, dominated by Russia, of course. And of course, we think of production in Russia, pipeline and other ways, pipeline and LNG from Russia. And of course, everybody thinks of Qatar for LNG. But sometimes people forget about how much natural gas there is in Iran, which is mostly not produced because Iran is not really a sort of full participant in the global economy.
Great, great. And the European market is more dependent on imports. And with the war in Ukraine and the Nord Stream explosion, LNG is coming strong. So is it a permanent solution or a short-term solution, James Brooks?
Well, despite the stated goals that we see from the European Union about moving away from fossil fuels and kind of moving towards that energy transition, right? The net zero and whatnot. It's clear that when you have conflicts such as the war in Ukraine, that it exposes the various vulnerabilities that they have, in terms of their energy. And so with that, you saw an increase in imports from LNG, from North America and basically wherever they could get that LNG. And so, as we move forward, they prioritize more energy security here. And with that, they're starting to kind of maybe reluctantly say, well, green is, gas is pretty green and nuclear is pretty green, and maybe they're going to be the next bridging fuel, in terms of the energy transition. Myself, I don't know that it's going to be a bridging fuel. I think that there's a long-term role for natural gas into the future in Europe and throughout this planet, and I think that as time goes by, we're going to see that. We're going to see how that plays out. Just one other point here is Europe and other countries are still very vulnerable, to these various geopolitical events. I mean, if you look at what's happening, with Hamas and Israel, and you look at now with the Houthis who are attacking ships in the Red Sea, and you're seeing cargoes being diverted away from the Red Sea. I think 7 out of the 10 top shipping companies have decided to divert their vessels. I mean, this is a really important thing to look at, and you can see the impact that that's going to have. And So as there could be further conflicts or and God forbid, a wider conflict in the Middle East, it certainly could have a major impact on the LNG market for Europe, for Asia, et cetera.
Perfect. Robert, please, China, India, I'm not sure, South Korea too, they are very dependent on imports from the Middle East, Australia, and the United States, of course. So considering the current conflicts that James pointed for us, and the cross sanctions from everywhere for everywhere, what's the balance for this situation of conflicts and natural gas and LNG movements?
Well, first of all, I think, it depends on whether you're talking about the crude oil market or the natural gas and LNG market. Our focus has been on natural gas and LNG, so I'll speak more on that rather than crude oil. But each one of these countries has its own situation. And, you have a country like Japan, which really, as far as natural gas is concerned, they don't have much, if any, local production. And of course, it's an island country, so they don't have pipelines from other countries that are bringing gas in, like China does, for example. And so their only option is liquefied natural gas as far as gas is concerned. However, I think that what Japan is trying to do to help for their own energy security is to bring back their nuclear power plants back online. So I think in the long run, if they are successful in persuading the Japanese public that it's safe to bring these nuclear power plants back online for production of electricity, that in the long run, you'll see a decline in the amount of natural gas and LNG, which they need to import from various countries around the world. China is in a very, very different position. China produces about 60% of the gas that they consume. So the majority of their gas is produced locally. And, that's very good for them. They also have gas imports, very substantial gas imports from Central Asia, mostly originating in Turkmenistan, which, as I mentioned before, has the fourth largest proved reserves in the world, but also from Russia. And they are negotiating with Russia the possibility of importing more natural gas through gas pipelines from Russia. They have a small pipeline also from Myanmar into China. And they have over 30 LNG import terminals. So China, the way that they're handling their energy security as far as natural gas is concerned, is by making sure that they have plenty of potential supply and they are not dependent on one source, which means that they are in very good negotiating position with the rest of the world, in particular with Russia as far as pipeline gas is concerned, but also LNG exporting countries, who are, of course, trying to get China to sign up for contracts. China is in a very good negotiating position. And South Korea has its own position. And other countries in Asia, in Southeast Asia and South Asia, all of them have their own, situations there. But those are two of the most important because China and Japan are the two largest importing countries in the world right now.
Robert, a little bit more about this issue, very interesting one that you are bringing to us. But LNG is more expensive than LNG, considering the OPEX, not the CAPEX. CAPEX, probably natural gas pipelines are very expensive and takes a long time to construct, to be constructed. But what's the equation of costs comparing LNG and NG?
Yeah, I don't think that the market for LNG is strictly speaking just based on cost. again, security of supply is extremely important. So what we found in the work that we have done in our research is that if a country or a company commits to a contract for LNG, then that is going to almost always it's going to flow. In other words, that contract will be satisfied no matter what the economics are. So they have already done that calculation. They've done their negotiations. It may be a good contract, which is very highly profitable for the buyer or for the seller. But once that contract is made, it's pretty well fixed in stone, and almost always that's going to be satisfied. Now, there are exceptions that happen. For example, when the price of LNG went skyrocketing after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. After that happened, as you remember, price of natural gas and LNG, went through the roof, in particular in Europe. And so what happened was there were actually some countries, some companies that had contracts to deliver LNG to Bangladesh and Pakistan and India, who decided, they did the calculation and they decided that they could make more money by breaking the terms of those contracts and paying penalties to those countries and delivering the gas to Europe instead. So this was very, very bad for Bangladesh and Pakistan that really need, that LNG and natural gas to produce electricity. So this resulted in outage of electricity in these countries. But I think it's kind of unethical on the part of these companies to do this myself, but it is something that they did. However, one of the things that was a little bit surprising, I think, was that even though the prices in Europe went skyrocketing in a few months basically after the war started in Ukraine, what was surprising, I think, to a lot of people, and it was even surprising to us, although our models showed that this was going to happen, was that the prices came down pretty quickly. And actually, in the winter time of 2022, when prices would normally be going up in the wintertime, actually price of gas was coming down and coming down very substantially. So the dynamics of prices can be really confused when you have these geopolitical events. So I thought that was quite interesting. And eventually, of course, they've come down an awful lot recently, and our prediction is that they're going to come down even more. So, it's going to be a better future as far as the LNG market for consumers over the next several years, we believe.
Yes. Before we go to geopolitical more details, James, I'm not sure that you have these numbers in your desk, but how much LNG and the correspondent NG equivalent can fit in a cryogenic vessel? Do you know this number?
I don't have that number on my right in front of me here, but Bob may have that on his mind here.
Yeah, I can give you a little bit of data on that. So it depends on the units of measure that you're using, Armando. But the typical, the most popular size these days is about 174,000 cubic meters. And if you divide that by about 2.2, you will get the number of tons of LNG. So, you're running about maybe 60 or 70,000 tons of LNG, 75,000 tons. So that's the size of a typical long distance, large LNG vessel. But LNG vessels go all the way down to 10,000 cubic meters or smaller, in some cases for more, local traffic, you might say, smaller terminals and smaller buyers. And the largest in the world are the ones that come from that service Qatar and those go up to over 220,000 cubic meters. So they can be quite large.
Perfect, perfect. And there are many cargo ships going from the United States to Europe every week. Bloomberg said that 70 or 60 or 70 cargo ships moving every week to Europe. Impressive, this number.
It's very interesting considering that before 2016 there were zero, right? So basically,
Yeah.
the United States, because of prolific shale gas production and so forth, has produced a huge amount of gas that's available for export to become, in that just 7 years, the largest exporter in the world.
Perfect, perfect. And about the geopolitical terms issues, this LNG is a tool in international relations. It's a kind of power that some nations have compared to other nations. How they use, who are using this power of LNG compared to other countries?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's exactly right. I mean, just like any valuable commodity that's needed, it's a potential tool for any kind of negotiations and for relations and really establishing economic ties. And so there's all kinds of ways that you can use this. And as we even saw, in a few years back here under the Trump administration, the trade war, with China, right? They're using LNG as a tool in terms of tariffs and whatnot. And so these things do take place here. And I guess, whether you think it's a good thing or a bad thing here, LNG is important. It is very important. So, so based on your perspective, you may have a viewpoint about that. But I'll tell you one thing here. On this planet in 2024 now, we still have 1 billion plus people that are in energy poverty, and, LNG is a clean, inexpensive, and abundant commodity that can be used to lift whole communities and whole nations out of poverty. So it's really important to understand that when you compare it to other forms that these countries are using, whether they're burning coal or wood or anything else. I mean, LNG is going to be environmentally friendly, and it's going to give them a real resource that they can really grow their economies. And so it's very, very important to keep that in mind as we're looking at these things from a geopolitical standpoint, right? We see this as an opportunity, to actually not only improve the environment, but also, improve the world as a whole.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Armando, what James said. Something that our company and the people in our company take very seriously is the fact that, there are so many people on this planet, a large percentage, who are still don't have good economics, and they don't have access to modern forms of energy. And even though, you might call it green energy that they have, if they are, but it is not the right green energy, because it's actually not good for the environment to gather wood and to deforest areas. And it's not good for health of mothers and babies in particular to have, your homes heated with burning wood and other things that, get into the air and cause respiratory illnesses and this sort of thing. So modern energy is good. And I think a combination of LNG for production of electricity and liquefied petroleum gas and propane for use in heating and cooking fuels is a very good combination. However, that combination is only workable if it's affordable. And so it's very important to have sufficient quantities in the market and enough competition that you can keep the price down. And, that is something that is definitely happening in the market, that you can see when you have these geopolitical events and conflicts, that tends to ruin the progress that is being made in terms of availability of these modern fuels, to countries that really need it. It's primarily sub-Saharan Africa and Asia, South Asia, in particular South America, where you are. There's a number of places that don't really have, the kind of economics and the kind of energy access that they need, to handle all of their requirements in a clean way. So I think most people in the industry are very, cognizant of this. Most of the people in the energy industry are very thoughtful people, and they really want to produce energy at the lowest cost that they can for competitive purposes, but also, they want to be profitable for their company, of course, as well. So they want to produce it efficiently. So I think those are things that are very important. And one of the things, Armando, just as a side thing here, that you're starting to see, and I'm sure you're seeing this on LinkedIn, is that the energy leaders in sub-Saharan Africa are starting to assert themselves in a way that they haven't done very much in the past. And they're basically telling Europe, they're telling North America, they're telling China, they're telling Russia, you can talk all you want about energy transition and cutting down carbon dioxide and all of these sort of things, but don't tell us what to do. We need to grow our economies. And if that means that we need to use our own local prolific fossil fuel resources, we're going to do it, because that's the priority for us. And I think that's a very positive thing. Once they have developed their economies to where it's, close to maybe what's happening in China, India's getting better, Europe, North America, then they can, I think, more comfortably start addressing, energy transition, carbon dioxide, and other emissions issues. But right now, the priority is economic development.
I understand. Very good point, this one, Robert. But using the same rationale, you see natural gas as a bridge fuel, a bridge source, or a stable source for the future? Considering the energy transition, that's something, let's see, very challenging process.
Well, I have a different viewpoint here. I think natural gas is transition, but I also think that wind and solar are transition. Okay, they're not here for the long run, because to be honest with you, if you look at it closely, they have environmental impacts and other kinds of things that most people who are so-called greens don't want to really look at. The cost of mining, the environmental cost in terms of killed birds and insects and various other kinds of things that are important to the overall global economy. So I think this is a transitional thing. In the end, there's, I think, only one real solution, which is forms of nuclear. Okay, so this is either nuclear fission that we know how to do right now, but there are some difficulties associated with it. And in the end, also nuclear fusion, which we will eventually learn. So whether that's 50 years from now, 25 years, 50 years, or 100 years, I don't know. But I think all of the types of energy that we're using today are essentially transitions over into these other sources that are going to end up being very clean as far as emissions are concerned, and virtually limitless. So that means they will be ultimately very inexpensive, very affordable.
And adding, sorry, James, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I wanted to, I agree with Dr. Brooks here, and if you look at the history of the energy industry, it has been evolving since the beginning. If you look at the different fuels that we've used, and as well as the advancements of technology, and I am in agreement with Bob. As we go forward, we will see continued advancements in technology, and I think nuclear is one of the obvious answers. But one thing that I also think that at least until we see that technology advance, what you're going to see is a a nice balance. A balance between different fuel sources, between renewables and natural gas, and maybe even in some cases coal going into the future, as well as nuclear, of course. And because every region, every country has its own needs. It has its own economies. They have to do things. You look at one of the cleanest sources of energy, which is hydro, right? But not everybody has access to hydro. So that will continue to be a source of energy going into the future as well. In the regions that has it available to them. So right now finding the balance, and I think that where we're seeing from a regulatory standpoint and politician a disconnect, between the industry, between the politicians, between the public here, is a misunderstanding of the different roles and why these different fuels play a certain role in today's economy and into the future, right? There's a very narrow agenda that is trying to be followed or pushed before the economy is ready for it, before the technology is ready for it, and so we need to make sure that we bring some pragmatism back into the conversation here. And I think I'm seeing more and more of this. I mean, you see this in the European Union, where they've maybe reluctantly started to agree that, natural gas and nuclear are going to be important. They call it a bridging fuel, but at least you're seeing some pragmatism coming back into the discussion, which I feel was out for a little while there.
Yeah, the term pragmatism is fantastic. I love these terms. That's what we need. But Robert, not forgetting that natural gas and oil are feedstock, petrochemical feedstock for our 6,000 products that we use worldwide. So nuclear, renewables, they can do only energy, can make only energy, electricity.
You're reading my mind, Armando. I was going to make that comment exactly, and that is that all the discussion we've been having really concerns natural gas and other things as fuels or a feedstock for, you might call it feedstock, wrong term, but for generation of electricity, which is extremely important. But we have all of these other uses that are also important, and just exactly like you talked about. And although I think there's a lot of young people who have been persuaded to be anti-fossil, that are trying to do research to find replacements, processes for these other things, I don't think they've had much success. And you hear about these things, they get publicized a lot, but in the end, if you look closely at them, they're not very good alternatives. And so I'm all for young people, and researchers, working overtime to trying to find alternatives and better ways of doing things. But it's going to be hard because, the truth is that oil, natural gas, even coal, strangely enough, have been proven to be excellent feedstocks for a number of processes and irreplaceable in the modern world. So you were totally right. That was exactly the right question. I totally agree with you.
Going to the north of the Earth, Arctic Ocean, not only Arctic as a way of transportation of goods, but of course as a source of energy and other things. James, how do you see this challenge of Arctic?
Well, with the Arctic, there comes a lot of challenges. If you look at some of these challenges that Russia LNG is facing, that they can only have an open passage, I think 4 months a year, and they're looking at various solutions, to try to keep those passages open for delivery of their LNG. Just like anything, whether it's Arctic or other, it will carry its own challenges, right? And I would say that Bob is probably more of an expert on the Arctic question than I am, but I certainly think that one thing to consider is whether it's Russia or any other country or organization, they're always looking for solutions to these problems, right? Because there is a growing demand for energy. The LNG is going to be a vital role, in meeting that demand for energy. And so, if there is a profitability to be made, they will be looking for solutions. But I'm going to also go ahead and refer to Bob here. He may have a bit more detail than I do.
Yes, Robert. Adding a question. Do they believe that are there huge reserves of natural gas in Arctic?
So the answer to that question is yes. There have been surveys and so forth that indicate that there's huge potential resource. However, what you've seen is that in the end, most of the projects that have been talked about, even the Russian projects, haven't been carried through. Most of them. Norway probably has the northernmost offshore fields up in the Arctic in the Snøhvit field, which I just found out means Snow White. Snøhvit is translated Snow White. But Russia has, I forget what it is, there's something even further north. But I think that the main thing is that what they found is that when you look at what it takes to develop these fields and then to transport the gas to, onshore and then from there to markets, it's just not economical. But not only is it not economical, but with modern techniques, especially since the shale gas revolution in the United States, and the ability of the Russians to develop their own onshore Arctic resources, they can just do it more cost effectively without going to these deep water or Arctic sources. So even though it's there, personally, I don't think it's probably ever going to be really developed, even though it's there, because it's just not economical. In 1977, I think it was, I was asked by the United States government to evaluate the potential for developing and delivering natural gas from the North Slope of Alaska to markets in the United States. And so I built models and transportation models that looked at that and various proposals and so forth. Now that was in late 1970s. Okay, that's like 45 years ago.
Yeah,
and
long
look,
time ago.
all that. I mean, every once in a while these projects come up again and people talk about them, but in the end, the cost is so enormous that it just doesn't make sense, because the technology for developing resources that are onshore and closer to markets has been developed. So we know how to do it. So you don't have to go that far away. That's what I believe.
Okay. Perfect. Recently, a newspaper listed 10 conflicts around the world nowadays. So the probability to increase conflicts is high. We know that people do not understand themselves. How do you see the complications for LNG worldwide with these conflicts increasing?
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me just take this. I mean, I think that the interesting thing, and just following up what James was talking about, and you mentioned also, Armando, is that natural gas is now, and LNG is now, a global commodity. Okay, and the world is now tied together by LNG traffic, much the same way that crude oil is, linking the world around and so forth. So, what we've discovered is that if you have trouble in one area, you can still link the world using different pathways or different waterways. So, as James was talking about, there are a number of companies that moved LNG or other commodities, and they previously, or their preference would be to move it through the Suez Canal and the Red Sea over to Asia, or from Qatar around Saudi Arabia and so forth, and up into Europe and so forth. But if they can't do that, they can go around the tip of Africa. So it's more costly, but they can still do it. And the same thing when the Panama Canal reduced the amount of traffic because of low water in the whole canal area, then these cargoes could be shipped around the tip of South America. So, there are alternatives. And in fact, they could even go, through the alternate path around Africa to get to Asia. So there's lots of different pathways. Some of them are more expensive than others. But I think that there is a lot of flexibility in the system at this point that there wasn't, 20 years ago.
No. Yeah.
Perfect.
If you don't mind me adding, one point to that, Armando,
Sure.
here.
Sure.
I completely agree with what Bob has said. We've developed enough flexibility within the system, to be able to continue to move, products and cargo and commodities and whatnot. But there's another aspect to this whole thing. I mean, I think one of the obvious answers is with more conflict, there's going to be more risks, and that's obvious. And the less obvious question or answer to that is, what is the risk going to be exactly? But when it comes to energy, one of the things that I want to point out, because again, we've touched upon this a little bit today, but it's very important to us as a company and just as people here is with these risks, you can see an increase in prices either because of longer delivery paths or supply disruptions or any of these things. And with that increased price, the countries that are going to be impacted the hardest are always going to be the poorer countries or developing countries here. And we saw this after the Ukrainian war here with Russia, where prices went up. Europe was able to afford the spot prices as the prices increased, and they were able to fill up their storage. While you had these other countries, Bangladesh and so forth, who could not afford those spot prices, right? And so they're the ones that lost, if you will, in terms of this. And it's a form of exporting your intermittency, if you ask me. When you have a countries who cannot rely completely on renewables or anything like that, and still need LNG and gas and so forth, but they can pay the higher prices, and so I think this is, again, it's a bit of an ethical thing, but something that we have to think about as an industry and as people, which is what are long-term solutions, when we do have geopolitical events or weather events or any of these things that impact the prices, when we have countries that are still very, very dependent upon LNG.
Yeah, and the point that Robert said, affordability. It's a very important point.
Exactly.
Yeah. Before we go to RBAC conversation, the last point, but I have a very sensible point that is about sanctions and bans from the US and from Europe that are making different countries arranging themselves in new groups and strong groups, as OPEC Plus, not too strong now, but BRICS, for instance, BRICS Plus. How do you see this formation and this challenge for the world, the West world?
Well, of course, again, probably the crude oil market is, in the end, it's much larger actually than the natural gas market globally in terms of volumes and in terms of dollars, total valuation. And so economies are going to be based more on oil and what happens with oil to a greater extent than gas and LNG. But gas and LNG extremely important. And I think, in the end, Russia has made a real strategic error by going into Ukraine the way that they did, where they have very limited options going forward. They don't, they have all kinds of supply. They've got all kinds of resources. They've got all of this. What they didn't really have was adequate technology, especially for LNG. And they depended on the West for their technology. So the sanctions have really hurt them in terms of some of the goals that they had. For example, they really wanted to be up in the top 2 or 3 as far as LNG production and exports was concerned. But these goals have been really thwarted by the sanctions. And of course, the sanctions resulted from actions that, in the end, I don't necessarily think that Russia had to take, but they chose to do so. And because they chose to do so, they are facing these situations. Novatech was probably the best producer as far as LNG is concerned. They're very successful with the Yamal facility. Of course, the Russian government gave them a lot of tax breaks and other things to make the LNG affordable. But they developed some very interesting technology. But here they are trying to get their second major project off the ground, Arctic 2 LNG. But what has happened, in the end, they didn't really have the technology totally. And so their partners are afraid of these sanctions. And so their partners are leaving them. And so they don't really have the full ability to get that project completely off the ground. Not only that project, but also the tankers. They have all these tankers on order that, that are not going to be able to get filled. So even if they were able to get the project off the ground and produce, they wouldn't have enough tankers to actually deliver all the LNG to the markets. So it's a big mess. And so, yeah, sanctions, we know same thing. We were talking about sanctions on Iran also. Again, we can have different views on politics here, but those sanctions clearly have made it very difficult for Iran to fully develop its natural gas industry, for example, for the benefit of its own people, as well as for the potential benefit of other countries through exports from Iran. So, if Iran perhaps behaved a little differently on the world scene, it could be a very different picture, and Russia as well.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Anyway, that's my answer, Armando, on that, and maybe James also would like to add something.
Yeah, I want to kind of circle back just a little bit here. You asked about the the BRICS and so forth. I mean, we've been living in a petrodollar world, right? Based on the US dollar, and for a long time, and this is not the first time, and this is not the last time that somebody's going to challenge the petrodollar. And as we see with economies, especially coming off of the recession from COVID and some of these challenges that we have seen, geopolitical events around the world, you have economies that ebb and flow a little bit, right? So they shrink a little bit, they grow, they shrink, they grow, and so this is definitely going to be a challenge for the next administration here, in the United States. We're going to be choosing that come November. They're going to have to look at these things and look at how to strengthen the U.S. dollar and look at what the moves China is making, what moves Russia is making, in terms of BRICS and some of these things, and it is going to be a challenge over the next decade, looking at this, but at the end of the day, a lot of this is based on confidence in a country and in their economy, and despite the challenges we have seen here in the United States, I feel we still have a very, very strong economy on the global stage. We have a good workforce, and we have the ability to improve, and to continue to improve. And with the right steps, in the next administration, we may see a much stronger economy come on, and then we'll have a different discussion, in terms of whether people are concerned about BRICS or not at that point.
Very good. You brought a point of petrodollar is not the first time that's suffering a pressure like that. And Robert, the technology dependence that Russia and other countries like China still have in terms of West technologies, a so strong point. Very good. Very, very interesting. Well, let's go to the last part of our conversation. If you please could tell a little bit about your company, RBAC, what type of service they provide. Please bring to us this data.
Okay, well, maybe I'll start, and I'm sure James will have something to add. But RBAC, sometimes also called RBAC, has been around actually for quite some time. develop and are primarily what we have been doing is to develop energy-related software forecasting systems that look at natural gas and other energy commodities, how the markets work, and how prices are likely to evolve over time based on different assumptions about what might happen in the future. You know, the future is, of course, very unpredictable. But one of the things that anybody who's operating in the industry or governments need to do is to take a look at, well, if this happens, then what would the likely response as far as prices be, for example? And so that's what we do a lot of, focused a lot recently on the global natural gas and LNG industry. And I think you've got a couple of charts that from some scenarios that we have actually run recently to look at the effects of potential shutdowns of the Panama Canal and the Suez Canal, and even shutdowns of LNG out of the Middle East. Armando, are those something that you can show here?
Oh, yeah, sure. Let me see if we have this
Yeah,
one.
so this one, okay, so this is very interesting. This is the European gas price called TTF. And you can see the different scenarios that we have. The blue line basically says what would happen if we cut out all supplies from the Middle East, which is almost entirely from Qatar. And one of its major markets is Europe. And you can see that the price effect compared with, let's say, the normal, where all the canals are operating in a reasonable fashion, you can see, you know, prices start normally in the under $15 area this winter, and then go down to as much as low as $5. But you can see, you know, we would get a price jump of almost $10 in January of 2024, our current month, if Qatar LNG and Emirates LNG was not available. We would get also a pretty severe or a jump up if the Suez Canal was closed instead. But you can see it's much less. That's the second curve, kind of reddish curve. And then you can see if the Panama Canal was closed, you can see it would have almost no effect on prices in Europe, which is interesting. But mostly the Panama Canal would be moving LNG to Asia. So if you have the second chart, we could look at, well, what about Asian prices? And you can see it's really pretty different, but you notice it's still, if the Gulf of, or the Straits of Hormuz are closed and Middle Eastern LNG is shut off from Asia, you can see a huge jump in prices from maybe $10 or $12 down to, you know, up to almost $30. I mean, huge. But also, if the Panama Canal were also to be closed, you can see that that would cause some degree of change. But interestingly enough, if the Suez Canal was closed, look at that, prices in Asia would go down. Now, you might ask, well, why would that be? Well, what that would mean would be less LNG would be flowing to Europe, and so more LNG would be flowing the other way to Asia from Qatar. So prices, there'd be actually more LNG would be available in Asia under that scenario, the Suez closed. Now, I wouldn't have thought about that. I would have never, ever thought that prices could go down in Asia if the Suez Canal were closed because of, you know, some difficulty, some geopolitical event. But when you have this kind of a model, you see, that takes all of these things into consideration, then you can get a result which is what we call counterintuitive. The intuitive answer would have been prices go up everywhere, but actually that's not really true. So anyway, it's very interesting. We have customers all over the United States and Canada, and we have some customers in Europe, and we are actually developing some customer base in Asia now as well. So our purpose is to help companies to make better decisions regarding energy by using these tools.
And Robert, do you run scenarios for risk of shortage? I mean, Can you simulate shortage?
Well, for sure. But, the market, the way that markets handle shortage is by, increasing prices. So
Okay.
when you have a shortage, then you increase price. But yeah, with the models will also indicate if you have, let's say, some expected demand, but you're not able to achieve it, then, the system will definitely tell you those kinds of things as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very interesting. And we've been doing this, like I said, all the way back to actually late 70s in different forms. We've worked with governments. We've worked with consulting companies. We've worked with energy companies and so forth. And, we just, this is our game. Our game is to provide this kind of tool, and then these companies can make better policy if they're governments, or they can make better decisions, investment decisions if they're energy companies.
Perfect. James, please, if you want to.
Absolutely. So I think Bob explained it very, very well, and I'll just summarize a little bit here. We really want to provide these market simulation tools to our customers, across the whole range of the industry, to make better energy decisions. And that is because we do have a very valuable product here in natural gas and LNG that can do. Not only be profitable for the company who is providing it and so forth, but when you look at this from a human standpoint, right? We are concerned about the environment. We are concerned about the economies and people and poverty and all of these things. And so when governments make good regulations, when energy companies make good decisions, it's a point where everybody wins. When you can provide energy cheaper, more efficiently, more environmentally friendly, everybody wins. And it's an industry that is the most important industry on the planet. And so our part of this is trying to give these tools to people so that they can, yes, be profitable for their company, but make those good energy decisions which help everybody.
Perfect.
Well said.
Yeah, I appreciate this conversation with Robert Brooks and James Brooks, both from RBAC, talking about geopolitics, LNG, and natural gas. It was a pleasure, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having us.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for having your your video, your podcast here. I think it's important to get this kind of information out, to the rest of the world. So good on you too, Armando.
Yeah, I have a new year. Very happy New Year. Thank you.
Happy New Year.
Happy New
Bye-bye.
Year.